Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Ralph Eisler.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. Welcome. We want you to know if you do or don't believe in God, you shouldn't be alone. So come and be with us right here in East Tennessee. You can find free thinkers, agnostics and others. Atheists, this is a show for you and for people committed to a life rooted in science, rational thinking, and unfettered by supernatural belief.
Well, it's September now, and the 17th of September is Constitution Day. It's the 229th anniversary of the finishing of the work of the Constitutional Convention. So we thought we'd talk about our nation's secular foundation and about how the Constitution is also a secular document. Now, this is a call-in show, and you can call in on the number that's showing up on the screen now. But we only have one phone line, so if it's busy, just try again if you can't get in. We're happy to take your calls, and we'd love to talk to you.
So let us tell you a little bit about our show here. It's sponsored partly by the Atheist Society of Knoxville. Frequently has a fun group, a meeting at an eatery and so forth. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's in the Old City, starting around 5:30 today. And look for the silver jacket copy of a book, I guess called The God Delusion, and other books there. And but if you are there to have a good conversation, food and drink, good. And I hope you don't come to punch and preach and just have a good interaction with people.
Right. So the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sundays are usually lively roundtable discussions or presentations of some sort or another, either lectures or sometimes we show DVDs. The second Sunday we hold the Skeptics Book Club, and on the fourth Sunday we mix it up a bit. Sometimes we have get-togethers that we call a reflections meeting at some person's house. Other times we might have just another type of activity there. So sometimes we like to play board games, but haven't done that too much lately, or whatever. Anyhow, just last weekend we had a convention of free thinkers with nationally known speakers such as Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience out of Austin there. And so we have a lot of activities at the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Come and join us.
Okay. Later in the show we'll give you our website and ask you to visit us for additional details and times and locations.
Okay.
So let's go to the news. Huh?
So go to news. We just have one item in the news. And if any of you are out there watching us, would you please call in? If our sound is not getting through, would you please call in and tell us? We've had a little bit of trouble now and then, and we can't tell from the studio itself. You'll have to call in. Anyhow, the one item in the news which I hope presages similar actions elsewhere around the country is that an Ohio school district's new CEO has declared that creationism and intelligent design no longer have a place in the Youngstown City schools. It seems they had been showing a video in the classroom by a Turkish creationist named Adnan Oktar called Cambrian Fossils and the Creation of Species. This was part of the 10th grade science education. The video claims that the Cambrian explosion totally invalidates the theory of evolution. If you remember, the Cambrian explosion happened about 550 million years ago, or started about that time, and over the next 40 million years, the number of species on Earth increased by a relatively rapid expansion, by evolutionary standards anyhow. Christian creationists regularly point to this explosion of life as evidence for creation by God and against evolution. Also, the district had been showing films produced by the Intelligent Design Promoting Discovery Institute. The films were called Unlocking the Mystery of Life and Darwin's Dilemma. But the new CEO for the district has put a stop to the anti-science nonsense. Krish Mohip says the district science curriculum will match the science standards promoted by the Ohio Department of Education, and that means no faith-based pseudoscience.
Yeah.
I'll get this all right here. He wrote a memo saying that beginning in this 2016-2017 school year, any reference to intelligent design, creationism, or any like concepts are eliminated from the science curriculum. Well, of course, they shouldn't have been there anyhow.
In the
I
first
don't
place,
really
yeah.
know how they got in there. But Mohip writes that discussions, activities, videos, and articles that may have referenced what he characterized as objectionable concepts have been replaced with state science standards. So just like that, the anti-science concepts are out the door, and potential lawsuits from church-state separation groups are moot. They won't have to go to court to fight it. The superintendent just threw them out. Not a bad way for a new guy to begin the school year. And hopefully he can come to understand how that creationist propaganda made it into the curriculum in the first place so that he can prevent it from ever happening again. And I hope many other school superintendents or curriculums, people who deal with curriculum, can take this to heart around the country. So anyhow, time to get on to our main topic, which is the Constitution and the secular Constitution that it is.
Yeah, the main thing about this secular Constitution, by the way, some very early Protestants used the word a secular state, by which they meant a state that is neutral and does not favor one religion versus another religion. In other words, the state keeps out of the business and let people do their own religion and leave each other alone.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what the founding fathers were about.
Well, you know, right, one of the first people who was a strong advocate of separation of church and state was Roger Williams.
Of course, yeah.
And that's why he was essentially thrown out of the New England colonies, because they had these little theocracies, these little mini theocracies there, where they didn't want.
Now this
church
is
and
a
state to be
Christian
separate.
version of theocracy, not an Islamic.
No, right.
But
right.
they both are. And you had in antiquity you had a Hebrew theocracy, and you got Islamic Canaan, you got Christian, and then within the Protestant version alone, let alone the Catholic, you had great diversity as to who was going to be dominating, which version.
Yeah, of course.
And part of what we're trying to show on the program today is once you let people explore things, they're going to have some different viewpoints. And that's how you learn from each other. Nobody knows it all. And in fact, the smarter you are, the more you know you don't know.
Yeah, right. Right.
So this liberty of conscience developed because people began to realize you can either kill each other off or you can learn from each other. And I think it's anthropologists, we talked about anthropologists before the program, go to other cultures to learn from each other and see how they solve their problems.
Yes.
And that's what a good historian does.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite clear. Last week we did a show on cultural conflicts.
Yeah.
It was just this type of thing, you know, that you have societies that set up rules or practices or behaviors and so that people can get along within the society. But when you have two distinct societies like this coming together, often the practices of the morals and beliefs, they conflict. And in, you know, one case, if it's rather mild, why it just causes a little irritation, but other times people go to war.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, we have a whole history in Europe of religious wars alone.
Yeah.
In Russia, you had religious wars, and you had wars among the communists.
Oh, yeah.
Slitting each other's throats.
Yeah, that's
it's a characteristic of human beings.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Russians. The group that were against the Tsars, there were at least two groups, one called the Bolsheviks and one called the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were the minor group and the Bolsheviks were the big group, because that's what those words mean in Russian. And interestingly enough, once the Mensheviks under Stalin got power, they suddenly began calling themselves the Bolsheviks.
They became the big dogs.
They became the big dogs.
Well, we're going to try to delve into some of the Christian views to show that once you have enough freedom, Christianity, let alone other religions, are going to develop diversity. Mm-hmm. And this is not bad. This is good because that's how people learn and make revisions. Science is constantly making revisions and improvement. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called science. It'd be called dogmatism.
Yeah.
And so, for example, you have on the notion of what's called communion or the Lord's Supper or the Last Supper, you have transubstantiation and consubstantiation. One is the Catholic view, transubstantiation. Then you have what came from the Lutheran tradition is consubstantiation. And there you have a little bit of, some major differences. In fact,
yeah, it's a big difference as far as I can tell. I mean, one is symbolic, you know, and the other is supposed to be taken literally, of eating flesh and blood.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a passage, and I want to read it to you, in the fourth chapter, or what's called the fourth gospel, which is the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
It says, this is presumably the words of Jesus. Now, most scholars think that sometimes the words of Jesus are really words put into his mouth by later writers. Mm-hmm. And in here it says, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that a man may eat of it and not die. And then Jesus presumably says, I'm the bread of life, came down from heaven, and et cetera, and says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Now, many scholars say, Jesus didn't say this. First of all, it was a Jew. And Jews thought in those days, and still do, it's wrong to drink blood.
Yeah.
And so this has to be at best symbolic. Mm-hmm. And now here it sounds awfully literalistic, and then if you...
but by the time you get to John, you're kind of in that point where you're not preaching to the Jews, or haven't probably for several decades.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's the later of the Gospels, and the influence of Paul and others had taken over.
Yes, right.
Paul was from Tarsus up north. Now, that's only just
okay
on the one thing. Yeah, we got to call in. Go ahead.
Call here now. Hello, caller. You're on Freethought Forum. Can you give us a name or a nickname?
Yes, it's Charles from Central Illinois.
Oh, go, Charles.
Good to talk to you again.
Yes. Your stream isn't running, but I did talk to the stream caller. So today is the Constitution, was it or was it not based on religion? Is that correct?
Yes.
One of the things I've noted is that a lot of people don't seem to be aware that James Madison was at the Continental Convention that formulated the Constitution.
Yes.
And he left us a direct record of everything that apparently that went on there. And in no wise, except for only once, did the idea of religion being part of the basis of the Constitution come up. That was only a sideways thing by Benjamin Franklin, which was promptly turned down.
Yeah.
So the idea is patently false.
Yes.
So the whole era of these men supposedly being, deeply religious, Pentecostal, evangelical types, such as David Barton keeps trying to portray them now, is a fabrication.
Yeah, that phrase, one nation under God, that phrase under God was imported later.
As I recall, that didn't show up until I think what, the 1830s?
Oh, I think it's much later than that.
You mean in the Pledge of Allegiance?
In the
to
Pledge
the
of
flag?
Allegiance,
That
yeah.
didn't show.
Oh, in the Pledge of Allegiance, that wasn't until 1953.
Right,
Yeah,
that showed up under the Eisenhower
Eisenhower
administration.
time,
Yeah, and he did it to quarter votes from the evangelical right.
Right.
Yeah, well, it was pushed pretty hard by the Catholics at that time, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, the country was in a situation they were trying to make a distinction between America and communism.
The Soviet Union.
Soviet
Yeah,
Union,
yeah.
the atheist Soviet Union, yes. Speaking about Madison, Madison was one of the strongest supporters of religious freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he really came out strongly against putting any sort of religious programming into the Constitution itself.
Yeah, that's what
That's
where
the Congress shall make no law
Right.
establishing a church or
religion.
or banning a religious practice. But it wasn't just him. The
Jefferson.
Even more than Jefferson.
Go ahead.
George Washington, and he made his feelings clear in a letter to a New York Presbyterian church, I think it was, where he says, "With the United States, we will not have mere tolerance of another religious practice. We will have, his idea was equal rights before the law for everybody."
It's a very good distinction, the difference between tolerance and freedom. Tolerance means one group's in power, and then they just tolerate the others. But what these founding fathers are trying to say is that all groups have the same rights.
Yeah, and at the Constitutional Convention, it was Charles Pinckney from South Carolina who proposed Article 6 of the Constitution, that there should be no religious test for public office.
Yeah.
And at the convention itself, that did not get much discussion. It passed pretty easily.
I think what they understood is that wherever you have belief, you have unbelief. You cannot believe everything.
But you can allow people to have their rights.
Exactly.
Exactly.
In other words, you have a right to believe something that I don't believe, and conversely.
And I can't penalize you believing what you believe, and you can't penalize me for not believing.
Yeah, you could criticize my belief, and that's good, but it's different from criticizing my belief and putting me in jail for believing what I believe.
Yeah. And one thing that really makes me angry about certain Christians is where they'll say freedom of religion does not mean freedom from religion. And that just makes me so mad when people say that.
Well, freedom of religion always entails freedom from religion because all religions are specific. So, a Protestant religion, and then within Protestantism you have diversity, and they are freedom from. In other words, Episcopalian is not a Baptist. A Baptist is not a Unitarian Universalist.
Not a Methodist, and a Methodist is not a Presbyterian, and so forth.
And there's even diversity among Baptists because you had Baptist Unitarians and Baptist Trinitarians.
And so one of the major problems, as I recall, is the idea of that separation of authority from religious doctrine was principally pushed by many of the churches out of fear that the other churches would gain the power.
Well, they began to understand that if you don't have freedom of religion, you have war. Well, thank you, Charles, for calling in. We appreciate hearing from you again.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Now, another thing, these early Christians in the Middle Ages, long before Protestantism differed on, was the notion of atonement.
Oh.
Yeah, you had Anselm and Abelard.
Uh-huh.
Anselm had the notion that Jesus came as a sacrificial death, as a kind of atonement, a compensation to make up for sin,
Yeah.
a payment to God.
Yeah.
Whereas Abelard came up with another notion that Jesus came and lived and died, and he was executed not as a sacrifice to God, but he lived and died because he was living a good life and was put to death. And his death is an example, not a sacrifice, not a blood atonement. I mean, that's a different version.
Yeah,
It's not a payment to God.
I haven't heard that second one. That's
It's a totally different.
that's not something
Totally different.
that I've run into at all.
Yeah, it's called the moral influence theory of the death of Christ, and the other is called the blood sacrifice. And
I
it makes
see.
it raises a question about was God such a being that he couldn't forgive anybody until he saw blood?
Well, yeah, I thought about that. And, in the Old Testament, people are always sacrificing animals, right? So that their God demands blood sacrifices.
Yeah, and that was progress, by the way, in that time.
Yes, that might have been progress.
Because you have the
people.
story of Isaac, that God presumably wants blood of a child, and of course the whole point of that is to say, no, we're not going to be like the Canaanites and some of the others.
Yeah.
We're going to not offer our kids.
Right.
But in the 6th chapter of Micah, a prophet just happens to refer to the fact that God doesn't want your firstborn. And the implication there as a sacrifice, because it was going on then.
Yeah, that's not emphasized very much in the churches.
Not anymore, no. Jesus came as the firstborn and only born, you see. And that's the Christian view.
It's always puzzled me that that was the only vehicle or path through which God could find a way to restore grace to mankind.
Well, the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, some of them challenged the priests with their sacrificial system.
Uh-huh.
And that's what Micah says. God is not interested in all this sacrifices.
Well, my take on that is, of course, that the priests, at least the temple priests, had a good thing going, that they didn't have to work, and they could get people to bring these animals in and sacrifice them.
And their families got to eat good protein.
Yeah, and they got fed quite well over it.
But our point is, you have among Christians alone, let alone the Jews and the Muslims, and every group has diversity. And in order to have a peaceful society, you simply have to have that ability to disagree and learn from each other. A good example, among Protestant Christians, you have the premillennial, the postmillennial, and the amillennial. Here they have the view of the millennium, and yet you have 3 versions of how it comes about. And it is a greatly different version of this. And that's among just Protestants alone on that.
Yes, and of course that's why we have all these Protestant sects, because their basic beliefs shouldn't be all that much different, and that is that Jesus died for their sins somehow or another. But they get into these arguments and disputes over the minutiae of whether you have to be totally submersed, when you're baptized, or whether you can just have a little water sprinkled on you, that seem to be entirely irrelevant to anything.
See, once you have certain presuppositions, then what becomes relevant has to do with what the presupposition is.
Sure.
And what we're trying to say, I think, is let people have their presuppositions and their viewpoints, but freedom. And then the way people change is you start spelling out the details of a view, and you say, well, that clashes with some of the other details of other views.
Yeah.
And so I think I need to make some revisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what all of us do. And even when we're driving cars, we do it every day.
Yeah, I
That's
guess.
how we survive to get here.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, I hope our callers will call in and help us out on this. There's a passage in the Southern Baptist wrote, and I'd like you to read it. I think you'll find it interesting, and many of us can identify with it, even if you don't accept his particular version of religion or about religion.
Okay, this comes from a book called The Unfettered Word. Southern Baptists confront the authority inerrancy question.
And they were having a big controversy among themselves on this. That's why he wrote the book.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let me start this. This is slightly long, but I think it's okay. Suppose a book comes to me claiming to come from God. Shall I accept it just because it makes such a claim? Then I shall have to accept the Quran, Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon, Mrs. Eddy's Science and Health. Here they come making just such a claim. What shall I do? Test them, of course. Apply the test of historical literary criticism, the test of inherent reasonableness. I shall see if their teachings square with the dictates of reason and conscience. Whatever comes to contradict sound reason and an enlightened conscience, I will reject, whether that means all or a part of their contents. I will not argue that I must accept all or none. I cannot honestly accept what is fundamentally contradictory or what is immoral in teaching. If I apply these tests to these books, books meaning the Quran, Mary Baker Eddy's book, why not to the Bible? Why should I demand that these books square with the dictates of reason and conscience, and then accept what is in the Bible, whether it is reasonable or not? The simple truth is that I cannot. The Bible must meet the dictates of reason and conscience. In one sense, the Bible judges me, but I must also judge the Bible, and I cannot accept it unless it stands the test of rational and moral judgment. And I cannot surrender the right to apply this test to any part of the Bible or any doctrine found in it. In other words, he is rejecting this view that the Bible is absolutely inerrant.
Exactly, he is. Now, this is a Baptist. Now, some of these Baptists were kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. What they did, I mean, they fired, I think, 15 professors. Those professors then went on and were hired by other Baptist institutions.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is diversity, even among the Baptists, is wholesale.
Yeah. Well,
And that's why they favored freedom.
You have these Southern Baptists, which are pretty much cohesive, and then you have these Baptists that the individual church sort of sets their own standards and practices, etc., and they're not glued together in one great homogeneous mass.
Exactly, yeah.
So I don't know if you find many of that type around here or not.
Well, you have
what
they broke up into the Southern Baptists, and then they had what was called moderate or progressive Baptists.
Yeah.
And of course, in New England, you have different American Baptists, and that's a different group.
Well, the Southern Baptists themselves were formed prior to the Civil War in opposition to the Northerners who wanted to integrate churches. And so there's two different points of views that are culturally determined, not really have anything to do with religion.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a cultural difference.
Yeah.
It's basically, slavery, for one thing.
Yeah, right. And these differences do arise, and we see it today in the clashes between Sunnis and Shiites in the Near East. It's like the Protestants and Catholics in Ireland in many cases that were always at war with each other.
We take our freedom in this country for granted sometimes, but it's a marvelous thing.
We do, and we just can't appreciate some of these other cultures and how restrictive they are. democracy is a product of the West. I don't think there's ever been any real democratic societies anywhere else in West Europe and the U.S., South America.
It takes centuries.
There may be countries that have votes in Africa or even in the Middle East, but they're not really democratic because if the vote doesn't come out the way the ruling party wants it to, then you have a lot of trouble. So anyhow, we have just a little bit of time here to take a program break. And so in case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded by them and by individual contributions.
Okay, and shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Knoxville Community Access Television, Channel 12 or Channel 194, depending on your local cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streaming, usually online, at ctvknox, KNOX.org. That's ctvknox.org.
Okay, today's show is live on September 9th, and you can call in the number of our screen, please do, and speak with us. Now, while we take a short break, please watch an informative video about our sponsors.
Yeah, play our video. That's it.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets once or 2 times a week. We have evening meetups of film, food, and conversation. ASK, Atheist Society of Knoxville's purpose is to supply a venue of community and camaraderie and outreach to atheists, agnostics, and freethinkers and others like-minded in East Tennessee and in this area. Our Tuesday meeting is going now at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in Knoxville's Old City. Recently, some of us worked out our Adopt a Highway pickup at Pellissippi Parkway.
Okay, well, the second Sunday of most months is Rationalists of East Tennessee Skeptics Book Club. The title of the next book is The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government by David Talbot. Sunday, September 11th at 2 p.m. Public's invited to participate. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps. You can visit rationalist.org to find out the rest of the calendar and books. Join us at our location for the book club at Books A Million, 8513 Kingston Pike, Knoxville, Tennessee, at 2 p.m. on Sunday. Okay, so back to the program.
Let's get back to the program. We want to try to emphasize it once again. When you have freedom, you have diversity of opinion, and that's not bad because it's a way of learning from each other. We all have changed and modified our views. I don't hold to all the views I held when I was 12 years of age. At least I hope. Otherwise, I'd be senile.
I would hope not.
But the point is that diversity is a part of a free society, and I wanted to, and Ralph wanted to show also that in the Hebrew and the Christian tradition alone, you have enormous diversity of opinions in religion, views of God. You have views of God in the Hebrew Bible that are pretty anthropomorphic, by which we meant by that is that God is particularly more like human.
Yeah.
I mean, he walks.
Yeah.
And he flies off the handle, and even passages in the Bible in which God repents.
Yeah.
Now, that's just a way of saying he changed his thinking on this. Well, that's what it means to be a person. So even if you say God is a person rather than just a principle, then he's got to change. And therefore you have what developed in the 20th century, what's called process theology. And that brought into theology evolution and said that God interacts with his own nature and therefore has to change. In fact, there's one theologian that says nature is God's body. Now, that's different from old version of theism.
Yes,
that's incarnationism.
I mean, I hear this all the time that, well, the one problem with science is it always changes, but God never changes. So
there are all kinds of versions of God changing. Yeah.
Well, okay, right, but the point is, as far as the Constitution goes, that there's nothing about God or religion in the Constitution itself.
It's not a theological treatise. Exactly.
It's not a theological treatise in any way. And, of course, people have, the Constitutional Convention passed it that way, but people have since tried to change it, tried to fix the preamble so that it included references to God or to Christianity, etc. So there are always people there trying to make that change.
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah, and they haven't succeeded in changing the Constitution, although they changed the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and changed our national motto to In God We Trust instead of E Pluribus Unum.
And mostly what their changes are exchanges. And they want to put out one thing in order to take in their end.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't want to make it Islamic. They want, and these people we're talking about, they want to make it a Christian version, and their particular version of Christian.
That's right.
And so a secular state says, leave this alone and practice your own religion, and if you want to convert other people and they want to convert in an open and free society, fine. If they don't want to convert, that's fine too. But usually, if you have a good point in your religion and you talk to me about it, and if it makes sense, that point I can incorporate into my view.
Well, yes, depending. You're kind of taking the view that religion is a little fluid and can change.
Exactly, is what I'm saying.
But so many people don't view it that way.
When I listen to the debate between Paul and James in Galatians, I see a debate going on that's been going on for centuries. Law versus grace, forgiveness versus strict regulations. You have to have both. You can't have a football game without strict regulations. You can't have the game of life without strict regulations. You can't have life unless you have forgiveness and grace and goodness and kindness to go along with it.
Yeah, you're talking about what makes a society livable.
Exactly, and that's what these Christians are trying to do, I think, using their own language. But that's what Paul is arguing about in Galatians, I think. And that's why you had to have rules against thievery.
Yeah, well, all societies do. I mean, even people point out, they try to say, well, our laws are based on the Ten Commandments. And that's ridiculous. I mean, most of the Ten Commandments are just appeasements to
Long,
Yahweh.
long before the Ten Commandments, you had mothers telling their kids, "Don't steal
Right.
from each other.
Don't-
Don't steal from your neighbors."
Don't kill people, at least in your own tribe.
Yes, exactly.
Don't lie under oath, etc. Those things appear in every society, whether they are theistic societies or totally secular societies.
And the reason, if they don't appear, they won't be a society, because
Right,
that's
they're-
what's absolutely essential to have a society.
Right. That's part of the cohesiveness that you need to have a group of people living together. I mean, we have, 300 million people in this country now, and we have to have some sort of agreed upon rules, okay?
Let's suppose you have a community made up of nothing but thieves. They could not survive unless they developed a rule against stealing from each other.
Right.
Because if they don't have a rule like that, there's nothing to steal. Nobody's earning anything.
That's right. Well,
And-
if you have extreme communism where everything is community property, you might say that you can't steal in a society like that. It makes no sense.
And that's why it didn't work too well.
That's why it didn't work too well, maybe, or whatever. Yeah, but anyhow, they again getting back to this Constitution, that as I say, the people at the convention didn't have much problem, I think, with leaving out the mentions of God or Christianity
No,
or
they
what
didn't have any problem
have
at
you.
all.
There was some discussion, but not a whole lot. But that was not necessarily true out in the cities or the byways, the highways and the byways. There apparently was a lot of discussion.
Yeah, where you had preachers taking over, trying to
Right,
have control,
right.
and
You know, famously why the Philadelphia clergy kept calling Thomas Jefferson an atheist, you know. He certainly wasn't. He had a lot of, what shall I say, Christian qualities in the sense that he believed in the moral teachings of the Bible, but he didn't believe in the miracles.
and he didn't
or
believe in
things
all
of
the
that
moral
sort.
teachings of the Bible, or some of the teachings of the Bible, because some of them are immoral.
Well, okay.
But I know what you're talking about. The Bible is basically about community life, and so they have to have rules and regulations. Stealing, lying, adultery, bearing false witness. All of these have to have strict control in order to have a society. It's if-then. If you want a society where you have harmony and being able to get along with people, you have to have certain rules and regulations. If you want to have a game, you have to have rules. Otherwise, it's not a game. It's mayhem.
Yeah, but what I'm pointing out is there exists this Jefferson Bible whereby he just took the New Testament and went through and cut out those passages that involved miracles or done things, and tried to keep the ones that only emphasized the moral teachings,
The moral structure,
that were found there.
Yeah.
But that did not make him a Christian necessarily.
Exactly. He had enough sense to see that these Christians had to have, in order to get along with each other and their neighbors, they had to have rules and regulations.
Sure.
Those miracles were not necessary to get along with their neighbors.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, the Christians over the centuries had among themselves to rule out some of their miracles because they started proliferating.
Well, we're still having miracles today. I mean, the Catholic Church just made Mother Teresa a saint on Sunday. And supposedly, a saint has to have 2 verified miracles.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Big deal.
I think they might have waived one of them for Mother Teresa. I don't know. But you start looking at what these miracles are. That's like, well, Aunt Sadie had a toothache, and she prayed to Mother Teresa, and toothache went away, so it was a miracle type of thing. I mean,
Well, most Catholics don't do that when they get the toothache. They go to the dentist.
Yes.
And if they can afford it, at least.
But it does surprise me that in this day and age, the Catholic Church is still pushing these sort of medieval ideas. And people,
It's interesting to watch the number of miracles have gone down percentage-wise over the centuries.
That's true. They've gone down considerably since 2,000 years ago when the Bible was written.
Well, you hear preachers saying sometimes the real miracle is that we got an orderly universe.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, there's so much superstition there that I have a hard time relating to, as they say, a Catholic Church, which is probably intellectually more enlightened than most of the Protestant churches as a whole. I don't know. You may disagree with me on that.
Depends on which. You have pockets within Catholicism and say, but within Protestantism.
Oh yeah, I
So it
understand
depends.
that. But
And then you have the Unitarian Universalists. The Universalists don't even believe in hell. They think this is a whole notion that's just downright obscene.
yeah, but the Unitarians, Universalists,
They drew out of the Protestant tradition.
yeah, I have a hard time really saying that's a religion. I mean, I don't know.
Well, if you define religion as supernaturalism, then of course by definition. But I've written an article on religion. In fact, it was published in Germany somewhere.
Yeah.
That religion is basically human beings trying to deal with their finitude on the moral level, intellectual level, and the emotional level. And then how we deal with it, that's where the diversity comes in.
Yeah, well, okay. I guess people have different definitions for religion.
Well, you can get 100 definitions easily.
Whatever. I mean,
What I try to do is say what's common in Islam and Christianity and Judaism and so forth.
my first encounter with Unitarian was when I was in college, and I belonged to the Methodist Youth Fellowship.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a big Unitarian church in Pittsburgh, and one evening we had the minister come over and talk to us, nice little discussion group. He's a real nice guy, but he made the statement, he said he thought about half of his congregation were atheists.
Well, I'm not quite sure he's right.
Well, I think he was probably right.
Yeah.
But me being a good Methodist at that time, I was a little surprised.
Well, I can see you had defined religion as mostly theism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Well, of course, yeah, sure, by definition. Yeah.
Sure. So, anyhow,
But it is an interesting question as to what religion. What definition of religion is more predominant now?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say what religion really is. I just want to say which version of religion is more prevalent in the sense that it would incorporate a lot of. For example, if you teach a course in world religions,
yeah.
what do they have in common? Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
Okay. Well, everybody's searching for the meaning of life somewhere or another for his own.
Well, see, that's another way of approaching
position in the universe. What we had a caller last week who called in and asked us, "What do you guys think is the purpose of life?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, my answer was there is no purpose. It's not. It doesn't mean life can't be meaningful. You can make it very meaningful, but there's no teleological.
Yeah, if you're going to have a purpose, you've got to have a being who is proposing a goal.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what he's presupposing, but that's a presupposition.
Right, exactly.
And even then, you have to presuppose just one goal. It might be, most of us have several, and sometimes we discover they're in conflict with each other and have to revise.
Yeah,
and you find that in the Bible, the deity revising his own views and goals.
That's probably because the different parts of the Bible were written by different people at different times.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. So
good point.
But yeah, so anyhow, so far as the Constitution goes, we have a secular society, and the only way you're going to have freedom of religion is if you keep it that way.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have a neutral government on this, then you're going to have a government favoring one religion, and that's going to bring more warfare.
Right.
And all you have to do is go to the Middle East and find it.
And there are people out there called dominionist movements, who think that they should have control, at least their version of Christianity should have control over all aspects of life, that is economics, education, what literature is published even. And so if you go to a situation like that, nobody has any freedom.
No.
It will all be controlled just as strongly as it would be under any kind of secular dictatorship.
Exactly, yeah. Dictatorship, whether you call it religious or secular, is still dictatorship, is what you're saying.
And we can see what's happened in Iran since the revolution has taken over there. The Iranian people are smart and basically cultured people.
They deserve a better government.
Yeah, and they are being suppressed to a large extent. I'm sure a lot of them would say, no, they're not, that they have just the government they want, but the more intellectual people among them do get into trouble.
Yeah, they do.
And so I think...
Well, we could spend a whole day talking about the diversity among just Christians alone in terms of their theology.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've spent years different versions of who Jesus was.
Sure.
And we spent a little bit on this program here, and you can find incredibly good scholars having diverse viewpoints.
Yes.
On this.
Yes, I know. Even whether he was an actual person or whether he was an actual person who became mythologized, or whether he was a mythological person who became historicized, as they say.
I like G.A. Wells wrote a book, Did Jesus Exist? And he argued that Jesus did not exist. And then he wrote several other books, and then in the process he made some revisions. That's what I like about a good scholar like that, is he learns from other people, and if he thinks he made some mistakes, he makes some revisions to constantly trying to improve. And then someone said once to me, well, he didn't know it all after all. And he would be the first to say, yeah, of course.
Yeah, right.
That's what it means to be human.
Yeah, well, there's this argument going on now between people like Bart Ehrman, who maintained Jesus was a real person, and people like, say, Robert Price, who is more on the mythicist side. And so these are ongoing discussions.
Now, Price and Bart are fairly close, and they both hold there's a real Jesus, but a mythology was woven into the historical Jesus. Most scholars hold of this.
Yeah. So, anyhow, we're winding down here. It's program closing time, so it's time to start wrapping things up. So get out your pen and paper. This has been the Freethought Forum, a program of the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
So if you can get a pen or something and a voicemail, we'll give you our number is 865-272-9060.
Okay.
And Freethought Forum at yahoo.com.
Okay, well, those who identify with no religion, fastest growing segment of society, you are not alone out there.